Having played the USF Bulls back to back in 2023 and 2024, once under Nick Saban and once under Kalen DeBoer, who performed best? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It is the Sunday morning after Alabama exploded in the fourth quarter to beat the USF Bulls at home 42-16. Obviously, that score does not reflect what happened on the field. Alabama was only able to muster 14 points leading up until about 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And it left a nasty taste in a lot of Alabama fans' mouths because the season before, the performance at USF, the performance was very, very similar. That time, Alabama only mustering a total of 17 points the entire game, but the defense was able to hold USF to 3. Now, there were good things and bad things about this game. Obviously, I think the majority of what we saw that hindered Alabama in this game fell on the issues on the offensive line with Caden Proctor out and kind of the reshuffling and things like that. Obviously, Formby was a huge liability in the game. You saw once they removed him in the fourth quarter, all of a sudden Alabama started scoring points. The offensive line started asserting itself. The running game was clicking, and that kind of cleared everything up for Jalen Milroe to do his thing. That's not to say that Formby is a bad player. He's just young, and he was getting smoked. And once USF beat him a couple times, they just kept bringing it. And I mean, that's what a good coach does. But overall, it's not something that is going to define Alabama's season, much like it didn't last year. Alabama played poorly without Jalen Milroe on the road, and then wins the SEC, makes the playoffs. Those same issues that hindered the USF game last year ended up costing Alabama a chance at the national title last year. But in this sense, Kalen DeBoer and staff, they made the correction. They made the change on the field during the game when they absolutely had to. I get the philosophy behind it. You kind of stick with what you've got. You don't want to risk injuring Pritchett any more than he's already dinged up. So, yeah, we can deal with the penalties. We can deal with the sacks. We just kind of have to endure and win the game and get out of here. But once the game actually became in danger, they had to make the decision, and they did, and it worked. It clicked just like that. It was night and day. And I would encourage Alabama fans to really take that as the silver lining in this game, because that was the first really big coaching decision that Kalen DeBoer has had to make, and it worked. He did exactly what he had to do. He tried to be smart about it. He tried to be strategic about it. But when their backs were against the wall, he made the right call and got the dub. Not only that, they almost covered. They still almost covered. So, but, looking at Nick Saban's win last year, there were a lot of external factors in this game in Tuscaloosa. I would argue that there were more when they played at USF last year with the weather. Obviously, Jalen Milroe did not start. They started Ty Buckner. I still feel like some of that was to show Alabama fans who were crying to bench Jalen Milroe, hey, look, we can bench him, but this is what football is going to look like. But I kind of am wondering now, like, who handled the USF struggle game better? Was it Nick Saban or was it Kalen DeBoer? And let me preface this, like, this video isn't to bash Nick Saban. Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time. I adore the man, but I do think that after last night, there were a lot of tweets and Facebook posts of people saying, okay, this isn't going to work. Why isn't Kalen DeBoer getting mad? Why isn't he doing this? I do think that you guys need to see and understand exactly what happened yesterday. And we can compare it to what happened a year ago at USF, so you can understand just how good of a job Kalen DeBoer actually did as a head coach. last night. So let's look. Let's start off with the basics. So last night, you've got a 42-16 victory over the USF Bulls. Last season, you had a 17-3 victory over the Bulls, who were 1-2 coming into that game. They were 1-0 coming in last night. Alabama started off okay. It was a little sloppy. You had the big touchdown run from Milroe, but things kind of started to go downhill from there. Same thing can be said last year. But looking overall at the total game, let's go through the yardage here, and let's look at the offensive output from Alabama was a total of 393 yards, 199 passing, and 194 on the ground. Most of that coming in the fourth quarter, right? They averaged almost 6 yards per play. Last year, Alabama was just shy of that in total yards with 310. They're about 80 yards shy. They had 107 yards passing, but they dominated on the ground, 203. But they averaged less in almost 5 yards a play. They had 16 first downs last year. This year, they had 21. They had the ball for almost 30 minutes this year. Last year, they had it for almost 30 minutes as well. Offensively, there's not a lot of difference in what happened outside of that fourth quarter. The biggest difference is that unlike Nick Saban, and Bill talked about this last night on a reaction show to the game, who refused to put Jalen Milroe back into that game, even at a point where Alabama fans were a little nervous that, hey, we might lose. Kalen DeBoer recognized, like, we're in danger of losing this game. It's the night that they're going to dedicate this field to Nick Saban. We're at home. It's 2 games into my coaching debut at Alabama. You can't win to USF or lose to USF at home, right? Auburn had just lost earlier in the day. And so he realized, like, we're actually in danger of losing this game. The defense has been on the field a lot. They're exhausted. These guys are going to score eventually, and they did. We've got to do something to fix what's happening with our offense. So he made the decision that needed to be made. And I know some word coming out this morning is that Pritchett was pretty much like, hey, coach, I'm good. Put me in the daggum game. Like, we got to fix this. And so they made a necessary change. And instead of squeaking out a small margin victory, you saw the offense flip on its belly, right? You saw it was a flip of the coin. And that is something that is not necessarily how Nick Saban would operate if it's not, an SEC opponent or a national title game. We've seen him make some kind of crazy moves like that, especially, the biggest one being benching Jalen Milroe in the 2017 national title game and putting a true freshman starting quarterback. But it's kind of the same thing. Like, the worst thing that could happen is you don't win the national title. You had to make a change to be competitive. Kalen DeBoer has a lot more on the line, and you guys, he's got to win over the Alabama fans, and we know Alabama fans are notoriously insatiable. I posted a predictive graphic yesterday morning before the game that Alabama was going to win 52-17, and I had Alabama fans in my comments pissed at me because I said USF was going to score 17 points. Well, they scored 16. And so, because Alabama fans expect a shutout every game. They expect to score 70 points every game. Well, that's not the case. You have to manage your expectations. But in terms of who coached the game better, that's where I would argue that it was Kalen DeBoer. No, he wasn't bouncing around the sidelines, throwing headsets and this and that. But if you remember correctly, last year, neither was Nick Saban. He, when the weather delay, he walked down the tunnel soaking wet and wasn't talking to anybody. It was, kind of sad. But in this instance, in a time where, he's got to win over the fan base. He's still trying to win over the team. He's got a brand new staff. They're still trying to figure things out. He's in a much more difficult place to deal with a game like that as a head coach compared to Nick Saban. And he made the right call. And therefore, I think against USF, if you're going to compare the two games, Kalen DeBoer outcoached Nick Saban. Me saying that out loud is going to piss a lot of people off. And it's not a knock against Nick Saban. I think that even according to Coach Saban himself, there were a lot of things that happened last year that he didn't really have his hand in. Just because, he's getting older. He said he was tired. He just couldn't do all the things and be involved as much as he needed to be. So just something to think about. Now I will say something really cool about Jalen Milroe. Threw 0 interceptions in this game. He hasn't thrown one yet this year. Last year we threw 0 interceptions, but we lost 1 fumble. We lost 3 fumbles last night. So that is an area outside of Kalen DeBoer's control. That's something that you fix in practice, but in a live game situation, you can't necessarily, pull a player out or put a player in to fix that. Fumbles happen, and it falls on the individual person. In terms of third down efficiency, Alabama went 5 for 13 last night. Terrible on third down, but they went 5 for 15 last year. Right? Fourth down efficiency. They didn't go for a fourth down last year. We didn't last night. They ran 68 total plays last night. They ran 65, punted 8 times last year, and they punted 9. They punted 7 last night. Now, Alabama had 13 penalties in this game for 120 yards. Last year, they had 5 for 35. Now, the bulk of those, I think like 7 of those were on the offensive line, maybe even a little bit more than that. And the bulk of those were also on Formby. And again, you saw that kind of clean itself up as the game went on. So in terms of who coached against USF better, I think in the department of having to make a decision, a game-winning decision, because you guys don't want to say this, but Alabama was at risk of losing that game. They were getting outplayed at a certain point in that game. So in terms of making a game-winning decision, Kalen DeBoer gets the check mark. He wins that one, right? In terms of doing what you need to do to take care of an opponent, preparing and things like that, I think both teams are exactly the same. The coaching staffs are exactly the same. Nick Saban, the biggest difference, again, is Nick Saban benched Jalen Milroe. It's possible that if Jalen Milroe played last year, that game would have gone a lot like it did anyway, just because, again, it's not Jalen Milroe, it's the issues with the offensive line. Jeff talked about this last night. Everybody thinks the answer is to bench the quarterback and bring in the new guy off the bench. There's not a quarterback in this country who's going to perform well with that kind of offensive line play. That's about as bad as it gets. You can't perform well. That's why Bryce Young hasn't done really anything in the NFL, because he doesn't have an offensive line. We all know how talented he is. So the biggest thing is Kalen DeBoer outcoached Nick Saban in that USF game because he made the decision when things weren't going right, when things were struggling, and it got to a point where you go, oh my gosh, this has to stop. No, he wasn't running around slinging headphones, smarting off the media members and things like that in halftime interviews. But you know what he did? He identified the problem. He fixed the problem on the spot, and immediately Alabama got better. And again, they almost covered. The storyline is going to be, well, Alabama didn't look that good the entire game. They got beat the entire game. They scored a bunch of points at the end. But what nobody's going to talk about is the fact that Kalen DeBoer problem solved that immediately, like right then and there, fixed it on the spot, and then boom, Alabama takes off. It was like a different team. And it wasn't that they were sleepwalking and this and that. They could not do anything. They were getting outgunned. And I know a lot of you guys are upset about the defense. The defense is on the field that much because the offense keeps going 3 and out. It's okay for them to give up a touchdown. They're exhausted. They're exhausted. We saw that in 2016 in that national championship game, I think it was. Offense couldn't convert, kept going 3 and out. The defense was exhausted. So in this sense, I do think that Kalen DeBoer outcoached Nick Saban in this particular game. If you compare the two games, I do think, just based off of that topic, that Kalen DeBoer did the better job against USF. That may not go over well with a lot of traditional Alabama fans, but guys, Coach Saban's not our coach anymore. We love him. We have extreme reverence for him. But he's not coming back out of that tunnel to coach Alabama or anywhere else. He's not our head coach. He is retired. You have to buy in to Kalen DeBoer. He's a different style coach. No, he doesn't swear. No, he's not jumping around screaming at people on the sidelines. We have Kane Womack doing that. We have Nick Sheridan up in the box doing that. Y'all, if y'all didn't see that. Coach DeBoer is cool, calm, collected. He's a silent assassin. He's analytical. He's watching. Where's the problem? How do I fix it? What options do I have? Elijah Pritchard said, Coach, put me in. I said, okay. What happened? They scored 28 unanswered points and almost cover at the end of the game. And for all you going, oh, we're going to get beat by Tennessee, we're going to get beat by Georgia, we might. This is this dude's first year. He's not going to go undefeated. Come back down to earth a little bit. It's okay. As long as we're not losing to the Cals and the Northern Illinois and the New Mexico states of the world, we're doing okay. For this to be his first year, we're doing okay. We are doing all right. That USF team is not your typical American Conference team. Alex Galesh, that dude, they better enjoy him. He's not going to be there long. He got that team ramped up and ready to run through a wall to beat Alabama. And for a minute, it looked like they could, but they didn't. Because Coach DeBoer made the right call on the spot. Alabama's offensive line has been a sore spot for 3 seasons, guys. 3 seasons. It has not gotten fixed. 3 seasons under Nick Saban. You don't want to hear that. You don't like that, but it's true. The guy came in the first game. There was an issue with the offensive line. He fixed it. And I know, oh, he didn't fix it sooner. Well, he didn't really have the option to fix it sooner because you don't want to hurt your guys who are already banged up if you don't need them to play. Bench him. When he needed it, he changed it. Again, Nick Saban has had 3 years to fix that part of this team, and it hasn't gotten better. And now Kalen DeBoer's inherited that problem, and he fixed it in 1 quarter. That's not to say that Elijah Pritchard's going to go out there and be a star the rest of the season. I think he could be. He didn't look great against Western Kentucky last week. But once you get Caden Proctor back in the game, that offensive line settles in like it's supposed to. We'll see what happens. I think really good things are coming. I think Alabama's going to surprise a lot of people this weekend when they go up to Madison. And we'll talk about that Thursday night. So make sure you are liking, subscribing, doing all the things. Tell everybody on Twitter and Facebook, hey, there's this guy Cotton. He knows what he's talking about. Or there's this guy Cotton. He's an idiot. Either way, share us. I'm joking. Anyway, that'll be it. As always, you guys know the drill. Say your prayers, read your Bibles, wash your hands, horns down. Beat Auburn, LSU, and Tennessee too. Roll Tide.